Module 2, Introduction to Macroeconomics. In this module, you will learn the model of the business cycle and why policymakers seek to diminish the severity of business cycles, how employment and unemployment are measured and how they change over the business cycle, the definition of aggregate output and how it changes over the business cycle, the meaning of inflation and deflation and why price stability is preferred, and how economic growth determines a country's standard of living. Before we get started with actual content, pause the video and take a minute to set up your notes. Notice that you are going to be drawing and labeling a business cycle in these notes. In this module, we focus on the model of the business cycle. The business cycle is the alteration between economic downturns and upturns in the economy. So, shown here, these ups and downs like a roller coaster. The business cycle has 4 phases. An expansion is when the economy is experiencing growth. Production is increasing and employment is expanding. Prices are often rising along with this growth. A peak is when business activity reaches a temporary maximum with full employment and near capacity output. The unemployment rate is at its lowest level. A contraction is a decline in production. The unemployment rate is beginning to increase along with a decline in output. And the trough is the bottom of the recession period. Here the unemployment rate is at its highest level and GDP is at its lowest point before it begins to turn back up. The entire business cycle is measured by the elapsed time between peaks in the cycle. So we measure peak to peak. Be sure you draw and label all 4 phases of the business cycle in your notes. Pause if you need to. Often, we also use other terms to discuss the health of the economy, such as recession, depression, and recovery. How do they fit in with this model? A recession is a decline in total output, income, employment, and trade lasting 6 months or more. The unemployment rate is beginning to rise, and it is going higher and higher. A depression does not have a technical term, but it is a recession so bad that there is a general state of gloom in the society, and media starts talking about the recession as a depression. Recovery refers to the period after a trough when output and employment are expanding towards the full employment level. Now in this, the full employment level is shown by the potential GDP line. So that is where we should have our unemployment rate at. A recovery is that expansionary period below that potential GDP line, but approaching that line. It shows our economy is recovering. However, the economy has not reached its potential output yet. Pause the video here and summarize this first page of notes before you get started in the next section. Now go ahead and take a minute and set up the second section of notes. Economic indicators are statistics used by economists and government agencies to measure the health of our economy. Aggregate output is the most important. Aggregate output is the economy's total production of goods and services for a given time period, usually a year or a quarter. Aggregate output is measured in the United States primarily with gross domestic product statistics. So if GDP rises, we are in an expansion. Output is increasing. If GDP falls, aggregate output is decreasing and we are in a contraction. Aggregate output is closely related to employment. When the economy is strong, near the peak of the business cycle, many goods and services are being produced, firms need to hire workers, employment is high, and the unemployment rate is low. When the economy is weak, during a recession of the business cycle, fewer goods and services are being produced, firms need to lay off workers, employment is low, and the unemployment rate is high. Go ahead and, if you have not so far, draw a business cycle and show what GDP is doing throughout the business cycle. Remember, GDP is increasing in an expansion and decreasing during a contraction. It reaches its high point at the peak and its low point at the trough. Real GDP per capita is a variant on GDP we will discuss in future modules. For now, notice how it shows our overall pattern of growth for the last 110 years, with ups and downs in between. This upward trend, filled with smaller ups and downs, expansions and contractions, is a good representation of the business cycle for our country. Employment and unemployment statistics are another important set of statistics that economists and government officials look at and that correspond with business cycles. The unemployment rate is calculated by a random survey of 60,000 households nationwide. The survey is selected so as to be representative of the entire population of the United States. The survey asks a series of questions and employment status is based upon the responses. The interviewer does not classify the interviewee, and the interviewee is not allowed to define his or her own employment status. Employment means you have a job. Having a job means that you worked at least 1 hour for pay during the survey week, or you did at least 15 hours of unpaid work in a family-operated enterprise, or you have a job but maybe were temporarily absent due to illness or injury or vacation or some other personal reason. Unemployed persons are all who did not have a job at all during the survey week but made specific active efforts to find a job during the prior 4 weeks and who were available for work unless temporarily ill. It also includes anyone who has been laid off temporarily and is waiting to be called back into work. Now, people who are unemployed must be actively looking. Someone who does not want to work and someone who has given up on finding a job are not considered unemployed. The labor force is everyone who has or is looking for a job. So the labor force is equal to the number of people employed plus the number of people unemployed. And the unemployment rate is the number of people unemployed divided by the number of people in the labor force times 100%. Flip over your notes and see if you can find the civilian labor force and the unemployment rate for these statistics. A country has the following labor statistics. They have 0.3 million people 16 years old or older who are working part-time, 4 million people 16 years old or older who are working part-time, 14 million 16 or over who are working full-time, and 2 million without jobs who are actively seeking those jobs. Can you find the labor force and the unemployment rate? You should have come up with a number equal to about 10%. Notice here the relationship between the unemployment rate and business cycles for years 1989 through 2009. Periods of recessions are indicated by the shaded boxes. Notice that the unemployment rate increased each time we had a recession. And it wasn't a small increase, but a fairly significant increase. Price stability is another important statistic watched by government agencies. Price stability refers to the ups and downs of prices, and when prices are stable, generally prices aren't changing. Inflation is an overall rise in the price level. Inflation is considered bad because it reduces our ability to purchase goods and services. $1 of our hard-earned income doesn't go as far if the prices of most goods and services are rising. However, a little bit of inflation is also a sign of a growing economy, and so inflation tends to be on the rise during the expansion phase of the business cycle. And if it is small and slow, it is not seen as a significant problem. If inflation is rapid, it can create serious problems as our money becomes basically worthless. Deflation is a fall in the overall price level. While this may sound nice, deflation is bad too. When overall prices are falling, consumers will hold on to their dollars and continue to wait for lower and lower prices. This waiting creates a problem as producers find they can't sell goods and services. Producers respond by lower prices and consumers respond by waiting even longer to make a purchase. This puts us in a tailspin of a recession-type situation. It is important to realize that changes to the prices of a few goods just changes the opportunity cost of purchasing those goods. But it does not constitute inflation or deflation. Inflation and deflation are terms reserved for more general changes in the overall prices of goods and services throughout the entire economy. Pause the video here and summarize the second page of notes before we get started on the last section. Now go ahead and set up this last part of your notes. Now we combine our two models of economic growth and production possibilities. In this module, we have been discussing growth in aggregate output as part of the business cycle. In Module 3, we discussed the idea of growth in productive capabilities. How are the two related? Imagine a talented athlete who is good, but not great enough to be an all-star in his or her sport. Suppose this athlete suffers an injury. Because of the industry, his or her performance is significantly reduced, but after some rehabilitation and time, his performance returns to the original level of good, but not great. Now suppose the athlete undertakes a more diligent approach to his sport. He works harder in the off-season, improves his nutrition, gets stronger, faster, smarter about the game. He studies film to learn where gains can be made and mistakes can be avoided. These efforts fundamentally increase the athlete's performance level and turn a good athlete into a great athlete who is now an all-star. In fact, this talented athlete is far superior than he was before his injury. Now, the period of rehabilitation does not represent growth. It's simply recovery back to the original level of output. The second situation does represent growth because the level of output has been increased. Likewise, if we are in a recession, moving down on our production possibilities, below our potential GDP line, we're producing at point C on our production possibilities curve. Even as we begin expanding again, as long as we are under our potential GDP line, we are still to the left of our production possibilities curve. If we move above the potential GDP line, we may simply be pushing ourselves temporarily to the right of our production possibilities. Economists would say that this level of growth is only sustainable if we are actually improving our resource capacity of our nation. This increase in resource capacity is shown by the upward slope of the potential GDP line. This represents an increase in potential production and corresponds with the shift to the right of our production possibilities curve. When we can shift our production possibilities curve to the right, this also allows us to have an increased standard of living across our population. And while not everyone will benefit from that equally, most people will benefit to some degree if our economy is growing and our standard of living is on the rise. Pause the video here and summarize this final page of notes. If you did not draw the two models, the production possibilities model and the business cycle model, go backwards in this video to that last slide and make sure you get those down and show how the two are related. Here are some additional resources to help you study and provide you with more practice with this type of problem. After we look at the models of supply and demand, we will move into models of aggregate supply and demand, which will return us to this business cycle model as well. This is the last slide of the video. Review your notes. Add your own examples where you can. Mark questions you have that you wish to discuss in class tomorrow, and write any questions you want me to go over in class on a note card, a sticky note, or a small piece of paper that you can give to me as you enter class tomorrow.